Will we see the New York Islanders turn their attention to JT Miller with many of the other options off the table? Plus, we have further discussion around Patrick Kane possibly going to Edmonton. We have a few media members' ideas about the price tag's likely going to cost. We have several signings on Long Island as well. It appears Lou Lamoriello has finally woken up from his long summer's nap. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at here today. But some good news, I guess we'll kind of go with a good and bad here on the New York Islanders. Is it appears as though Lou Lamoriello is kind of woken up here from what I'm calling his long summer's nap, which I know is a little bit of a snarky remark, but it's been the summer of inactivity with that team. And we know it's been widely discussed on this channel, several other places as well, that they really needed a couple of, for at least one or two significant moves to really have a chance to getting back to being that team that was a Final Four, cup contending team a few years back. They came within a goal of beating the Tampa Bay Lightning to go on to the Stanley Cup final. They might have won the Stanley Cup that year had that happened. They were so close, but obviously last year was a major disappointment, some major steps back. There were some, some circumstances that were kind of beyond everybody's control, including a lot of COVID stuff, injuries, things that, you just can't really prepare for sometimes. And certainly had a big role of the New York Islanders, but, we're certainly expecting, especially after the last time Lou spoke, which was quite some time ago now, he certainly made it sound like there was going to be some moves up his sleeve, or at least tried. And I think he did try, but, we haven't heard from Lou in forever. But at least he's back. We have some Islanders actual news to talk about. They've signed 3 players, which has been widely reported for some time to be done. But at least we know now. I'm surprised it's not into September before we found out this information. But they've got 3 of their young players all signed. Kiefer Bellows signs a 1-year deal at $1.2 million. Alex Romanoff, who they acquired from Montreal at the NHL draft, which obviously sent their first round pick the other way, signs a 3-year deal at $2.5 million. And Noah Dobson, the young breakout defenseman, their former first rounder from a few years back, gets a 3-year extension as well at $4 million. I kind of thought they might lock up Dobson longer term, but as Lou said, he wanted to see more of what Dobson did last year before committing to such a long-term, bigger money contract. Which I guess that's kind of how he likes to do business. Not shocking or surprising in the least. From Dobson's point of view, like I said before, like sometimes with these contracts, they just typically don't get any cheaper. So if you want to lock them up, but there certainly is risk associated by doing that. But in a few years' time, when all these guys get their, next, especially Romanoff and Dobson's case, the cap should be higher, should be increased by then. It should be a different landscape where they can hopefully, improve their play some more and really cash in at that time. Lou also spoke to the media today, first time in a long time, after getting all these contracts announced. Did go on about the fact that there were certainly, it sounds like there were some attempts at some moves, but essentially the costs were too high. Basically, he fed everybody what everybody expected, is that he believes in this team and that this team is able to bounce back. And there's a lot of good pieces here. When asked about, players who can play with Matthew Barzal, he said he feels like those players are already here and that Barzal is capable of leading that team, in the right direction, being the offensive star for that franchise. And, essentially just kind of doubled down on the fact that he didn't do much of anything because he believes in the group. I think it was, I could go on for 10 minutes of quoting him, but there's no point. Like, and essentially that's basically what it boils down to. Like, he said that, if there had been moves that were available for that made sense, he would have made them. And there have been reports that they were certainly in on players, but he wasn't willing to pay the prices that the other teams were demanding. So they lost out time after time after time. Just that simple. Now, there's some other information that we're going to talk about here with the Islanders today. Before we do, there's another quick signing here before we move on to the rest of the Islanders stuff, and that's the San Jose Sharks have also signed Noah Gregor. He gets a 1-year deal, $950,000. He had a pretty good year last year. Kind of broke out and for the first time being a more consistent regular NHL player, and certainly looks like he could be a part of their team for some time. But he gets a 1-year deal here for now to see if he can kind of reprove himself one more time. But basically back to the Islanders here with Lou, essentially, like, are we surprised? No, I understand he's not wanting to mortgage the future. I get all that. But at the same time, you have a team that's in win now mode. You have a team that's older. You have a team that if you don't win or even, make some improvements to get back to the playoffs here, it could be, a very different looking team in a couple of years. It seems, like I said, only getting older, only getting more injuries piling up. It's not a situation where if I were him, I'd be too worried about the future, because he might not even be there if this team doesn't improve. For starters, like I said, you have an older team who needs to win now, or it's not going to work out, and it could be some dark times ahead. It's just that simple. They don't have a deep prospect pool. They have some interesting players on the way up, but it's not like it's stacked by any means. They've been a team that's been, making the playoffs, contending. A lot of their picks have been lower. They've been moved some. It's just quite like that. Now, Rick Dhaliwal, even though he's Vancouver media, he had some comments regarding the Islanders and Kadri. He talked to Kadri's agent and get some information suggesting that the Islanders were definitely in on the mix. So all those rumors we heard, definitely true. Obviously, the Flames landed him. We knew they were in on it for sure after the announcement came. The Avalanche were trying to keep him, and the Carolina Hurricanes were also in the mix as well. Those were the teams that were all serious and tried really hard to bring Kadri on board, or in the case of the Avalanche, bring him back. But obviously the Flames won out. They all were in a similar situation where they all needed to move money, and the Flames were the only ones willing to pay the price that was being demanded by other teams to get it done. So they won the sweepstakes. It's just that simple. But Calgary and Brad Trelivings recognized that they had a heck of a year last year. They faced some major adversity this year, and he knows that they have to continue to kind of be in go-for-it mode. So he's willing to pay that price, where Lou doesn't seem to be in the same frame of mind with when it comes to spending future assets to win today. It's just that simple. But they were definitely tried. They fell short. They tried and fell short on some other trades around that obviously never happened. And Dhaliwal also goes on to mention he wonders, will they turn their attention back to Vancouver? This is how it kind of connects to them. And JT Miller. I mean, JT Miller is a player that was heavily rumored for some time and is still considered to be a very likely trade piece. The Vancouver Canucks in Miller's camp could very well maybe work out an extension. Just doesn't seem likely. I know there's some people that feel that the Kadri contract didn't do Miller any favors. It might be helpful to Vancouver for maybe getting an extension in place. Obviously, if you look at Kadri being just a little bit older than Miller, obviously didn't put up quite the point totals that Miller did last year, but still, it wasn't too far off the mix for what he did. And if you look at, comparable seasons, not exactly, but, close enough, you could say. They both bring a little bit of that grit and snarl to their game as well, leadership qualities and all that, like a lot of the intangibles. So obviously Miller was reportedly looking for maybe around $9 million or more, but Kadri signing for $7 million might bring his price down a little bit, but it still may not necessarily work out. There's been some talks that there could be no negotiation extension talks between Miller and the Canucks once the season starts. So if they don't get something worked out, it's quite likely that he and his agent are going to say, we don't want to talk about it any further until after the season. And if that's the case, Vancouver may not have any choice but to trade him. I mean, I think whether they're in the mix or not in the playoffs is going to play a role in what they do here. But you have to think that Lou and the Islanders would be one of those teams who's missed out time after time after time. And it would make sense if they could maybe get a deal done for Miller. I mean, obviously, getting a long-term contract in place for Miller, Kadri, or any of those guys is going to have risk associated. And obviously, the Islanders have not been opposed to those types of things with other players in the past. So we'll see if Miller becomes a guy that they certainly turn their attention to. We know that there's certainly players out there on the Islanders that could be made available. They have some interesting prospects. Like I said, I don't have a ton of them, but, there's Ratu, there's Dufour. They have young defenseman Robin Salo. Obviously, they have some picks they could include. I don't know exactly what it would cost. There's been some talk about Villiers could be made available for the right trade as well. So we'll have to see if Miller is a player that the Islanders and the Canucks, we know they talked about him at the draft. They wanted to deny it. Lou is one of those kind of guys. He, loves his secrecy and doesn't want anything leaked. And I wonder if it leaking might have been what shut it down, because Rutherford and Lamoriello were both denying it, even though several reporters confirmed 100% that it was indeed being discussed and it was getting close. So could they revisit? It makes a ton of sense. A few other tidbits, though, as well from the Islanders. He did mention that Shea and Andy Green are definitely not coming back. They're not players they're considering offering contracts to. So there's that. Another quick update, too, when it comes to Romanov and whether or not he's fitting in with his new teammates. Apparently, he's really good, best buddies with goalie Ilya Sorokin. They hang out all the time, so that's certainly going to be good for each other and good for Romanov to get acclimated with the team and certainly, kind of get involved with the new team. And, it takes a little while to kind of make friends and get in the room and kind of, get used to everything. But having a good friend like him there will certainly ease things for sure. A couple of tidbits on the Canucks. They also talked about the fact that there are definitely teams interested in young goalie Michael Dipietro. It might be fair to say that the Canucks are somewhat motivated to get a deal done before the season starts, because based on where he's been at with the depth charts and what they've brought in to work with their Abbotsford team in the American Hockey League, there's some concern that he very well might not even make that roster and that he could be sent to the East Coast League, down 2 levels from the NHL, which will certainly impact his trade value and could really kind of deter teams even further from picking up the contract and picking up a trade. But Dipietro is garnering interest according to Dollywall. Like we said before, there's offers on the table, some that make sense. There's 3 to 4 teams reportedly at least mildly interested. The level of interest is different with all of them. I talked about before about Montreal making sense. There was a connection there previously. Now that we know Price isn't going to play, you put Allen and Montembeault at the NHL level. You get Primo at the AHL. They could use another goalie to compete with him and play, and I think he could be a good fit there. So I think that makes a ton of sense, but it makes it also a lot of sense. So the Dipietro would get moved before the season starts. If he's not traded by training camp, I would think by the end of training camp, something will materialize and definitely come to be here. Now, on to Patrick Kane. We talked yesterday about Kane maybe ending up at the Edmonton Oilers. For starters, yes, he would have to waive his no-move clause, and there are some to believe that he would be enticed on the idea of playing with McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and all those guys and having a shot at a Stanley Cup. Now, so I've seen some people comment on that video saying, we think he wants to go to the Rangers, wants to be reunited with his buddy Panarin. That could be too. I think if the Rangers come with the right offer, I think that's something he'll entertain. But yes, a lot of the fans commenting saying that, Kane's not indicated he wants to leave Chicago. That's true. He also said that he will start the season there, and unless things get, a lot worse than he might be expecting, then he might stay. But you know what? At this point, I think it's fair to say Chicago is probably going to be a bad team. There's no chance they're really looking to win a lot of games this year. I really don't see Kane and Taves wanting to go through a painful season, and I think it's quite likely that it will be pain in Chicago, which will entice them to want to waive their no-move clause. And I don't think that Edmonton would be the only team he'd want to go to, but I can see why there would be interest there. I mean, the Avalanche and the Rangers are probably another couple top teams that would be interesting to him too, and it's hard to say. And we don't know how he's going to handle things if and when he says to the Blackhawks that he's willing to move. Will he say, I only want to go to this team? Or will he say, Edmonton, Colorado, Rangers, for example, I'll take any of them, work out a deal, and get it done? I don't know. We don't know how that's going to work out, right? Obviously, he'll have his preference and be able to call this shot, and that's that. But there are some Edmonton media still talking about this further, even Boston media chiming in on the conversation as well in regards to Edmonton being the team that could acquire Kane's services and what it might take. I know Jason Gregor, obviously Edmonton media, discussing the fact that he thought it could be a 3-team deal and that they could actually involve a team like Arizona to kind of be a broker and cut the cap hit further down. Obviously, Chicago would retain 50%, go to Arizona where they could retain another 50%, and they could get Patrick Kane in Edmonton for like $2.65 million. That would be nice. Now, his actual salary this year is pretty cheap as well. I think if that were the case, they'd only end up paying him like $775,000 or something like that. That's for the whole year. So obviously it'd be less than that. It'd be a fraction depending on when it takes place. But he felt that the price could be a roster player to make the money work. So you're probably looking at a Fogel or a Puljujärvi and maybe a first and a second. So let me know what you think on a trade for Kane. Do you think that's going to get it done? A first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a player like that. Now, the Boston media, Boston Globe reporter Matt Porter also had some notes on this as well. He says he felt it was going to be a first, a second, a prospect, and then maybe players like Yamamoto or Barry to make the money work. It could even be both Yamamoto and Barry, on a first and a prospect, like 4 pieces basically. And I've seen other reports saying a first, a second, and a prospect. So they're all similar. Obviously, they need money to go out. If they had a third party, though, like Gregor is mentioning, they wouldn't need as much money to go out. So you're looking at probably one player, whether it be Fogel or Yamamoto. I can see Barrie maybe being a possibility too, depending on how things go, because this is more likely going to be a deal later into the season, either at the trade deadline or a little bit before, and it could get complicated. But as I mentioned before as well, the Oilers are likely going to be operating on long-term injury reserve, and if they're doing that, then they're not going to be accruing cap space. It's going to get more complicated. They may have to move out more money and get out of the LTI to be able to really, plan better for the future for the deadline to try to make this kind of a big acquisition to make it happen. But there's 3 different ideas on what the price could be. First, second on a prospect, first a prospect in Yamamoto and Barrie, or you're looking at a third-party broker where maybe you have to give Arizona a prospect and maybe a 4th or 5th round pick. And then, of course, you're going to have to give Chicago as well, a first, second, and maybe a Fogle or a Puljujarvi. So it's going to be expensive. You only do it if you think it's going to help you win the Stanley Cup, but it's certainly an intriguing thing to take a look at. So could we see Kane to the Oilers? Those price tags make sense. Will the Islanders turn their attention to JT Miller? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll talk about it further. Of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.